I'm Jura the Time Traveler, and this is my lifestyle time travel blog. Today we are talking about resurrection festivals. One of the most famous resurrection festivals is certainly Easter. We will be talking about festivals from different cultures, other resurrection festivals, because in many cultures there is this theme. Let's start with ancient Egypt and the Osiris festival. The other name for this festival is Hoek festival, and it was held at the 4th month of the flood. And during this festival, some parts of the Osiris and Seth myth were recreated. So let's see why Osiris is connected to rebirth. So the short story is that Osiris was the one who ruled the world, but he had a jealous brother Seth, and he wanted to overthrow Osiris. So they fought and Seth killed Osiris. Then Isis, the sister wife of Osiris, was looking for him all around Egypt. She found him and she wanted to resurrect him, to bring him back to life. So Seth saw that, and then he chopped off the body of Osiris and he threw his body parts around Egypt. So then Isis had to look for those parts, those body parts, and she went to that mission with her sister Nephthys. So the two of them found almost every part of Osiris except for his phallus. But she picked up the pieces, she pieced him back together for a brief moment just to conceive Horus. After that joyous moment, Osiris went back to being dead, and he ruled the underworld. And the Egyptians celebrated that cheerful moment of Osiris coming back to life. But that is also connected to fertility and seasons and the cycle of the year, agricultural cycle. And during this festival, this myth was reenacted in a dramatic performance that included dialogue, monologue, dance, songs, and it lasted several days. During different periods, this festival was celebrated differently, but there are certain parts that never changed. The beginning of this festival was marked by sowing seeds in Osiris' bed. And what is that? They were planting a small garden in shape of Osiris. I mean, this sounds weird, but listen to me. So, at the beginning, they had one linen cloth, and on that linen cloth they outlined the silhouette of Osiris in profile, so full scale. And the outline part was filled in with soil. In that soil, seeds were sown, and they were watered until they germinate. There are more complex Osiris beds. Like in Tutankhamun's tomb, there is a wooden Osiris bed. So this silhouette of Osiris is actually outlined by a wooden frame. But even when you have a wooden frame, you should have linen, because that is the part of mummification process. And this practice is actually mirroring the process of sowing and growing seeds. And this practice of big Osiris beds was reserved for kings and for temples. And during the late period, in some parts of Egypt, even the common people had some form of this practice. They had small clay containers called Osiris bricks. It looked like a brick, but at the center there was this silhouette of Osiris in profile. And inside that silhouette of Osiris you should put soil and seeds and also water them so they could germinate. And on top of it you put a piece of linen. And during the Greco-Roman period, in some parts of Egypt, there were grain mummies. The concept is similar. You have soil and you have seeds, barley seeds, but they're also mixed with sand and wax, and they are formed like a mummy. And you can decorate them with wax or silver masks. And then that mummy you put in a small wooden coffin. And those mummies can be buried as a part of a ritual. And the last day of this festival was marked by rising a jet pillar. And jet pillar actually represented the backbone of Osiris. And some parts of this festival are documented at Incarnofred stela from the 12th dynasty found in Abydos. So this was a day-by-day depiction of everything that happened during this festival, including that theater performance when priests and people masked in different roles and reenacted the myth of Osiris and Seth. Probably some parts are missing from this stela, because the first day begins with the procession of Osiris, and the people recreate the mock battle between Osiris and his enemies. Because the second day is the day of the procession of Osiris, which represents the transfer of his body from his temple to his tomb. So probably he was killed at some point, probably before the first day began. On the third day, Osiris was mourned, and the day 4 was actually the night vigil. So during this night, priests recited prayers and conducted funeral rites for Osiris. And the fifth and final day was a joyous day of Osiris's rebirth. And on that day, his statue was transferred from tomb to his temple. And the next resurrection festival was Hilaria, a Roman festival of Magna Mater. And Magna Mater was actually the Near Eastern goddess Cybele. This cult, the cult of Cybele, was introduced to Rome in 204 BC. And the story about the introduction of this cult is really interesting. You see, during this time, Hannibal was there. Hannibal was anti-Portis, and he was a huge threat for Rome. So what did Romans do? They consulted Cybele books. That was the book of prophecies. And in these books there was actually an advice how to get rid of enemies who threatened the territory of Rome. So enemies on the Italian soil. And her advice was to introduce the cult of Great Mother from Asia Minor. So in Asia Minor, this goddess was actually celebrated as a black stone, her sacred stone. So Romans arranged the transfer of this stone, the sacred stone of Cybele, to Rome. It arrived on April the 4th in 204 BC. And because Magna Mater didn't have her own temple because she was new to Rome, they placed this stone at the Temple of Victory at the Palatine Hill. And it was not enough just to bring the stone to Rome, they had to bring also the priests of Magna Mater, because her cult was pretty specific and foreign to Romans. Romans liked to party, Romans liked to celebrate and have big feasts. And mourning rituals were not part of the Roman culture. And this cult included priests who castrated themselves, who whipped themselves, who went into frenetic trance, which was not the Roman way of doing things. But in order to get rid of Hannibal, they agreed to practically everything. They weren't participating in these cults, but they respected them. So as long as Phrygian priests or Galli, that were the priests of Cybele, conducted those rituals, that was okay. But the Roman citizens were forbidden from participating by the decree of Senate. Romans Romanized the cult, so they held annual games and banquets in her honor. So at first this festival was celebrated only on the 25th of March, the day after the venereal equinox. And later, during the Late Imperial Period, it lasted 4 days. And after Caligula, Romans could participate more in Eastern cults. So things were a bit more relaxed in that regard. On April the 10th in 191 BC, she received her own temple at the Palatine Hill. But what was actually celebrated during Hilaria? Well, similarly to the festival of Osiris, this festival also had that theatric component. And that theatric performance actually recreated some parts of the myth of Attis and Cybele. There are different versions of this myth, and one of the shorter ones goes like this. Attis was a beautiful man, and Cybele, the goddess Cybele, was obsessed with his beauty, and she wanted to marry him, but he was actually in love with the king's daughter, the king Midas. And during the wedding between Attis and king's daughter, Cybele was extremely mad. She was enraged that Attis is slipping away from her fingers. And what did she do? She sent craziness for everyone. You get crazy and you get crazy and you get crazy. So everybody became crazy, including Attis. And because Attis was not in the right mind, he castrated himself next to a pine tree. Cybele saw that and she was devastated because she didn't want that to happen. Actually, that was an accident. And she asked Zeus for help to preserve his body and for his hair to continue growing and that he can move his small finger on the hand. Cybele buried his genitalia and he became the god of vegetation. And how was this myth actually recreated by the Phrygian priests? The calendar of Filius Philocalus from 354 AD recorded different festivals held in the honor of Magna Mater. And during these days, different parts of the life of Attis were recorded and recreated. The first day was March the 15th and it was called Cana Intrant or Reeds Enter. Also on this day the head priest sacrificed a bull that is 6 years old in order to promote the growth of seeds on the nearby pastures, the pastures that he could see from that hill. And on this day, priests known as Canaphori were carrying reeds through the city of Rome to her temple at the Palatine Hill. And this was to mimic the birth of Attis because he was born and he was then abandoned as a baby next to the river, so these reeds are here to simulate the landscape of that scene. The next day, a form of fast began on March the 16th when worshippers of Magna Mater abstained from eating bread and drinking wine. The 22nd of March was the day of Arbor intrant or the tree enters. So, the dendrophori or the tree bearers cut down a pine tree and carried it through Rome to the temple of Cybele or the temple of Magna Mater at the Palatine. And this pine tree was actually sacred to Attis because he killed himself next to one of them. This tree was decorated with violets because they symbolize his blood, and on this day a 3-day mourning period starts, the mourning for the dead Attis. So the 24th of March was actually the most dramatic of all days. It was called sanguem or blood. This was the culmination of grief. So on this day, priests whipped themselves, they mutilated themselves, they cut some flesh from their body, and they did all that in a frenetic sorrow. But the next day, the 25th of March, was Hilaria. That was a joyous day of Attis's rebirth. And on this day they stopped with fasting so they could enjoy this wonderful day. The early Christians of the 3rd century actually associated the same day, the 25th of March, with the resurrection of Jesus. The 26th of March was the day of rest or requietio, because on the next day, the 27th of March, they had lavatio or bathing. So practically, they took the statue of Magna Mater and all the devices they used during this festival and they carried them in a procession to Almo stream, and that stream flowed into Tiber, so it's near. They washed those sacred objects and then they returned them to the temple. These festivals are designed to give us hope, because they depict this cycle of life, this cycle of the year. When the nature dies down during winter, it is reborn at the springtime. Happy Easter and thank you for watching this video. You know what to do, like, subscribe, share, send to all, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!